tell you the situation of our guest, this next person. Uh, I've always had a great deal of respect for him. I always enjoyed working with him. I was crushed when I didn't get to work with him anymore on a regular basis, but he's doing great things. He's down in the state of Texas with Next Level Athlete. He's got clients. I mean, when I talked, sometimes when I talk to you guys and I say some of this star business is BS because some of the people doing the star assignments are BS. Well, Greg Powers is one of those guys that colleges trust him. They want the information that they can get from Next Level Athlete because Greg and the staff there do a terrific job of scouting, finding players, augmenting what the colleges themselves do in tape evaluation, and that's why he's one of the best at what he does. The other thing is Texas football said, you know what? We want to bump up our recruiting section. We want to get people who really know what the heck they're talking about. So now Greg is in charge of the recruiting segment in Texas football. He's their recruiting specialist, and they've gone with Next Level Athlete. So Texas football, the Bible of football in Texas. Trust Greg Powers. So when we can get him on, that's a good thing. Greg, good to have you on. Haven't talked to you, I guess, since you were through Stillwater in the spring, but really proud of all the things you're involved in now.
Hey, Robert, thanks. Appreciate you, man. And like you know, I've always enjoyed working with you as well, and look to keep it going, man. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Well, I like people that, like I said, I trust and I know they're doing their job. Yeah, obviously this is an Oklahoma State audience, so let's get in a couple of Oklahoma State things. And I don't know how much I just text this young man because I'm going to try and catch up with him later today. But Oklahoma State got a commitment from a defensive tackle in the 2020 class really, really early. It seems like a couple of years ago. I think it may have been a year and a half. Grant Mahon from Denton Guyer. Obviously, Guyer is a tremendous program. John Walsh, the head coach there, is one of the best in Texas. But then Grant Mahon did not play last year because of a back injury, and I think he had back surgery. Somebody asked me just yesterday what's up with him, and I went to Texas football. He's set to play this season. Still, I think 6'3", 270, something like that. But have you heard anything on him? And I would imagine I'm going to be anxious to see what he looks like playing this year after missing an entire season.
Well, first off, Guyer is picked to be one of the top teams in its classification in Texas, and they're going to need a guy like Grant Mahon up front on the defensive side of the football to help them make a run at a state championship this year. They've got plenty of talent on that football team. They've got a quarterback commitment in Eli Stowers, who recently committed to Texas A&M. They got Mahon supposedly coming back on the defensive side of the football too, and a lot of complementary pieces. There is even a little bit of a rumor that they may have added KJ Liggins, who's one of the top 2021 guys who transferred in from Capel. So they've definitely got some good things going for that program. Mahon was dealing with, like you pointed out, a back injury. And when you're talking about back injuries, you just never know how serious it can be. I know whenever it first happened or went down, there was some talk behind the scenes that it could possibly be a career-threatening type of injury. So if he gets back on the field this year, I think that's great news for not only Denton Guyer, but Oklahoma State fans as well, because when he made his commitment to OSU, he was one of those guys who was on the path to be one of the top-rated defenders in the state.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to get in that's more strictly OSU, and then we'll go more broad base, is and really this 2020 class that Mike Gundy and his staff are recruiting has got a lot of Oklahoma kids in it. They've got, I want to say, 6 or 7 kids committed in state, which is a big number in Oklahoma, but a couple of them are from Bixby and got a couple of linemen and so forth. But in Texas, the one school they hit and hit hard was Waco Conley. and they ended up with a pair there. Corey Black, the corner, committed here recently, and then Trent Pullen, who is yeah, he's not that 6'4", 6'5" guy. He's more of that center guard profile of a 6'2", 6'3", close to 300-pound guy, but he was a guy that was pretty well regarded and recruited, even though he isn't in that 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" category. So Cowboys go heavy at Waco Conley. What do you think of the haul they picked up there?
I really like Trent Pullen a lot, and Corey Black. Pullen is, you hit the nail right on the head. He's a guy who I kind of project him as a center at college. I think that's the position that fits him best. He's really quick out of the gates and can get to the second level and secure blocks pretty easily because of his footwork and his desire and want to get out there to make those blocks. I think that's what I like best about Pullen. You know, he's strong. When he went to the Nike camp, he was effective as any other offensive lineman there, no matter if they were rated above him or below him or what class they were in. And then Corey Black is a guy who has tremendous hips. Watched him really closely at the Prime 21 camp last year as I was evaluating 20 kids at it, 2020s there. And he and Jalen Kimber, who's also a very, very highly rated cornerback, defensive back prospect who's committed to Georgia, to me had the best hips, foot, technique combinations. And I really think that Oklahoma State did a tremendous job of evaluating him. And when you put him in the same defensive back class as a guy like Jabbar Muhammad, who was our next level athlete, defensive back MVP in Dallas, I think you're starting to put together some guys who can start to limit some of these offenses in the Big 12. So we really know what it's about. We know Oklahoma State's going to be able to score points each and every year. So finding those right guys on the defensive side of the football is going to be key for them, especially in the defensive backfield as they try to slow teams like Texas and Oklahoma down to stay on top or get on top of the Big 12 rankings.
You know, and thank you for bailing me out, because I noticed, right after I mentioned the two guys from Waco Conley, and I thought, I forgot to mention Jabbar Muhammad. And I know you were talking about, he was offered, or he was honored because he did such a great job at the Next Level Athlete event. And I remember that I saw him this spring at Arlington Martin in the Under Armour regional camp, and man, he had a good day that day too. So yeah, Jabbar Muhammad, and I know I don't know if he's 5'9", 5'10", whatever he is, but he plays bigger than that. And golly, what an athletic kid!
And he's super cerebral. He's the type of guy that you want on your roster from a character standpoint. He's a team leader. He really has it figured out when you ask him questions about Oklahoma State or his recruiting process in general. He's already thought about the answers to those questions, because those are check marks that he checked off whenever he was going through the process. So he was really thoughtful and insightful about his decision-making process and where he wanted to play, and he approaches the game with that same regard, and I think that's really impressive. And every stop that he's made along the way, the Next Level Athlete Camp, the opening in Dallas, the Under Armour camp, he's been a standout at all those events. But he also brings it in the pads. You mentioned his size at 5'9", 5'10", and that's what he checked in. I think he checked in at our event at 5'9", 162 or 163, something like that. And he plays much bigger than that. He's very aggressive. He's not afraid to come up and put his hands on you and press a little bit, because he trusts his ability to hang in the receiver's hip pocket as they work down the field. And these are the type of guys that you need. I mean, you need these type of guys to be able to not only possibly man up against the number one receiver as they mature in a program, but when they get into the program as a freshman or a sophomore, they can get on the field as a nickel back, or they can get on the field to help your defense right away. It's not an era of college football where you can recruit guys and hope that they can all develop 2 to 3 years down the line. You have to have guys in your program that can step on the field and provide an immediate boost. And I think because of his confidence and the fact that he plays at the 6A level in Texas makes him a college-ready type of guy. That's somewhere on the field once he gets to Stillwater.
All right, Greg Powers with us, and I want to let everybody know we took those two early breaks earlier, so we wouldn't have to get interrupted, and we'd have plenty of time here with Greg. I've got the TPT phone going, so if you have a question for Greg and you want to text that in, you can text it in, or you can call in 533-1020, 533-1051, 1-866-229-1020, and we'll get you on with Greg. You mentioned the high-powered offenses, and you look at some of the receiver prospects like a Demond Demas, out of Tomball, Troy O'Meary out of Fort Bend, Austin, Marvin Mims, who's in the Frisco area. And the good thing is, while you've got a ton of receivers, and we mentioned a couple of DBs, Oklahoma State has committed, in Corey Black and also in Jabbar Muhammad, but guys like Jalen Jones at Cibolo Steel, and we know what Cibolo Steel's been producing. In fact, Oklahoma State's got Xavier Player here, true freshman, working out over here at fall camp. I saw Xavier Alford at the opening down in Katy, the regional down there. You've got guys like R.J. Mickens, Chris Thompson from Duncanville. I mean, I can go on and on. There's Dwight McGlothern from Klein Oak. The great thing is, while receivers are being produced, Texas is also producing a pretty good load of guys to cover them.
Yeah, I agree. I think defensive back depth in the 2020 class especially is one of the strengths in the Texas high school football rankings. The receivers are always going to be there. Right now, you can go 1 through 25 in Texas, and you're going to be able to find guys who can play at the P5 level, at the highest levels of P5 football. So what you need to do is to be able to find the defensive backs that can shut those guys down, because by and large, many of those guys are going to be playing for Big 12 schools. So if you're in the Big 12, you need to make sure that you're able to put defensive backs across from these great wide receivers and man them up. And I think that's a key to success. And really, as I look at some of the success teams in the SEC have had in recent years, especially Alabama, LSU, Georgia, they've done it with defensive backs who are from the state of Texas, working in their backfields. You get Jamal Adams, Deontay Thompson, Maurice Smith was really successful at Georgia and is now playing in the NFL. So, I mean, Kendall Sheffield went to Alabama, on to Ohio State to the NFL. So you're talking about a long list of guys who have left the state and the region, the Big 12 region, to go and play in the SEC. And I think that's where you can point to the Big 12 and say they haven't won that national championship. And I think the biggest thing is the presence in the defensive backfield. Big 12 teams need to keep those kids at home. And if they're going to want to compete for those championships, those are the type of guys they need, and need to build their teams around those types of guys. And it's always great when the state that you probably recruit the most heavily starts to crank them out on equal footing with wide receiver talent, which has been ahead of the curve the last 3 or 4 cycles.
Yeah, I didn't mention Ryan Watts either, but I've had a chance to see him, the kid out of Little Elm, and I mean, he's a freak on the
Joshua Eaton
on the defense.
And a guy who grabbed my eye at the Texas State 7-on-7 was Nate Floyd at A&M Consolidated. I know that's a prospect that Oklahoma State has shown some interest in the past as well. He was really talented, limited his side of the field, and was the MVP overall for what he was able to do on both sides of the football. So that's a rising prospect in Texas that's starting to climb up some of those rankings ladders.
Got a caller for Greg. Caller, you're on with Greg Powers. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Robert. I had a question for your guest there, Mr. Powers. When you saw those two defensive backs, Muhammad and Black, did you see were you able to see their 40 times, their vertical leaps, shuttle runs, any of that? And do you have those numbers by chance?
So with the Next Level Athlete Camp series, we don't take numbers, but we work in association with a number of the other camps and go out and watch those guys as well. Muhammad was a guy who plays a little bit faster than what you're going to find his listed times at. I think he was in the 4.7 range at the opening in the 40-yard dash, and that's a laser time 40. But what I like about that 4.7 is that Muhammad didn't scratch it. He wasn't afraid or embarrassed about what his 40 time was, because after that he ran it. He went out and dominated the camp. So sometimes those 40 times can be a bit deceptive. And Corey Black was a guy who tested at the same camp, was in the 4.6 range. So you're talking about guys who haven't put up those elite testing numbers when you're looking at some of the other defensive backs, like a Jalen Kimber, who was one of the top testers in the entire nation. Ran a 4.4 40 at the opening Dallas, and then went to the opening finals and put up similar results. Was one of the top 4 or 5 guys in the country. So there is a difference when you're looking at those times and where these guys are rated. Jalen Kimber is one of the top 20 players in the state. You're talking Jabbar Muhammad and Corey Black, who are in that 35 to 75 range, where there's still plenty of talented guys, but they may not have the same intangibles as some of the guys who are listed in front of them. And I don't think that you have to look necessarily at the 40 time to see what these guys are going to do with their on the field success.
Did you see? Were you able to get numbers on like their verticals?
I think Kimber was a 32, 33 vertical guy, and I can't remember what Muhammad was off the top of my head, but I think that Corey was really athletic in the vertical jump. And I just can't recall what Muhammad may have been.
All right.
Robert, you may have that on. Robert, you may have that on Go Pokes.
Yeah, and I remember Jabbar Muhammad at the Under Armour. He was a high 4.6. You mentioned, I think at the Nike he was like a 4.71, something like that. I think he was like I want to say he was a 4.68 or 9. It was not like Greg said, stellar, but that's sometimes guys aren't going to be track speed guys. They're going to be football speed guys. And Greg mentioned Jabbar's ability to process and think and react. And I think that's a big part of why he gets to plays quicker than other guys, is he thinks it through, and that's sometimes that's as important as how quickly the feet move.
And while you were talking, Robert, I was able to find the Nike camp results on Muhammad, and he had a 30.30 vertical jump, and Corey Black had a 32.2. Okay. So pretty athletic guys as far as vertical ability goes.
And one other question I had was there was a tall receiver out of, I think he's out of Midland, Odessa, somewhere out that direction, Lucic. I'm not sure if I pronounce his name correctly.
Yeah.
Loic Fonji.
Yeah.
He's one of our top rated guys in the state, and I think that Oklahoma State's embroiled in a battle with Texas for his services. Texas has also got a guy high on their list named Quentin Johnston out of Temple, Texas, who's picked up a lot of offers. Will they have room to take both of those guys, or is Oklahoma State in a better spot for Fonji as well? Our scouts in West Texas really love him. They put his game up against any of the top wide receivers in the state. As a matter of fact, they think he has the ability to be the number 1 wide receiver or number 2 guy. As Demas has clearly probably emerged as that number 1 guy. But when they made their rounds through there last year, they were really blown away by his potential and upside. And what's really cool about his game is his ability to kick the football. I don't know if you know this, but he's an excellent punter as well, and could probably get some looks and possibly a scholarship if he just wanted to punt in college. So that's a pretty cool and unique skill set that Fonji has about his game.
All right. Yeah, hey, thanks, Robert. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
All right.
Yep.
Appreciate it. And Fonji is, and I think that's when Casey Dunn, who is now not only the receivers coach, but he's the senior associate head coach for Oklahoma State. When he locks on, he can be a bulldog in recruiting, and this is a guy I know he wants really bad. So, we'll see how that plays out with Fonji. Hey, a couple of things real quick with Greg Powers before we need to get out of here, and I'm checking the TPTs. We don't have anything right there just yet. Were you surprised? I know he's maybe not as good as he's being ranked. But Brennan Scott, the linebacker out of Dallas Bishop Dunn, commits to Les Miles in Kansas the other day. And I mean, Kansas getting a lot of numbers. Now, when they get a guy like that, now you say, well, now they're starting to get a little quality.
Robert, you've been following recruiting for a really long time in the state of Texas, and you know by now, covering Bishop Dunn, that those guys could honestly go anywhere to any of the schools that's on their offer list, and their offer list can get quite lengthy down there as a lot of colleges stop in and make that as one of their top stops in the spring evaluation tour. And those guys put up a lot of good tape because they're playing against private school competition. So they don't have a fear of sending a guy to a Kansas or a Utah or an Oklahoma State or an Oklahoma or a Texas based on where they think that he's going to fit in best at the next level. And Brennan Scott, at the beginning of his recruiting process, was pretty much considering Oklahoma or Texas. That was the top two. It seemed like it was going to be that rivalry showdown between those programs for his services early on. And as the recruiting process has moved along, those spots, those schools have become tougher to get a handle on. Well, Kansas has been doing a pretty good job, and they picked up another commitment in Texas from Lawrence Arnold at DeSoto High School, who I feel is one of the state's top sleeper prospects overall. He's a tremendous sleeper, a guy who can stretch the field. And Emmett Jones, a former head coach at South Oak Cliff, who is now at Kansas, has really laid the groundwork in the DFW area as he started to mine for talent. And he's got a pretty good eye for talent, and they've been jumping on guys early, and I think that's helped them as well. So I do think it was a pretty big pickup for Kansas, especially name power wise, building a pipeline in with one of the top programs in the area. Now the question remains, how does Brennan Scott's talents translate to the Big 12? You know, because I look at his game and I feel like he's a guy who would have fit in really well in the SEC or the Big Ten, but always always seems set on wanting to play in the Big 12. But to me, he's that downhill thumping inside linebacker who would have went to Iowa and made a big name for himself. But does his skill set translate to the Big 12? I think that's a question that you have to ask yourself if you're a recruit who's going through the process too. How can I put myself in the best situation to be successful at the next level? And we don't know all the answers all the time. So that pitch to Brennan Scott, and we don't know the product they're putting on the field, that pitch to Brennan Scott might have been quite strong, and we just don't know what that is going to look like yet. So ask me if Brennan Scott made a good decision to go to Kansas in about 3 months, and I'll give you a better answer. But right now there's a great unknown with how that fit is going to work out in the Big 12.
All right, last thing, Greg. Oklahoma State they had Josh White committed early out of Cy Creek, linebacker. He decommits and goes off somewhere else. They worked really hard on Corey Flagg at Galena Park North Shore. I saw him at the opening regional at Katy, and he's not real big, but golly, he was the linebacker MVP, and he was by far the best. Oklahoma State, to finish the 2020 class, linebacker is a key position. And, we just talked about Brennan Scott. He might not be the fit for what Oklahoma State's looking for, but how many linebackers are left in Texas in 2020 because the Cowboys are still doing work in that area?
Well, it's not been a strong year at linebacker overall in the state. It's actually one of the weaknesses in the state of Texas this year. You look at the top of the list, and you have guys at outside linebacker and Drew Sanders and Prince Dorba. Drew Sanders is a guy who's committed to Alabama, plays inside linebacker at Denton Ryan, but could probably project to the defensive end once he gets into college. And then you have Dorba, who plays defensive end, who's going to have to play with his hand out of the dirt once he gets to Texas. So there's some question marks even at the top of the list when you look at that list this year. One guy I think to really keep an eye on is probably Derek Lewis. He's one of the top uncommitted linebackers in the state at Schertz Clemens. He's picked up some decent offers as he's went through the process, and I think it's a guy who would really excel in Oklahoma State's defense. He's got that good combination of speed and coverage ability and frame upside. So I think he might be one to watch. 6'2", 210-pound linebacker who's rated as one of the top guys that's left available in the state. And two other guys in Texas who aren't playing linebacker that I'm keeping a close eye on as it relates to Oklahoma State's list are wide receiver Jay Wilkerson from Midlothian Heritage. I think Oklahoma State was an offer that really intrigues him. He's got a buddy who plays baseball that signed with the Pokes last year. And then they recently extended an offer to defensive tackle John Sawyer Gorham Welch, who played for the state champion Longview Lobos. He's a country-strong defensive lineman who they recently identified to be good enough to receive an offer. So those are two other guys that I'm keeping a close eye on in Texas and could be potential Oklahoma State Cowboys by the time National Signing Day rolls around in December.
All right. Hey, Greg, I always appreciate it. And again, congratulations with all you're doing with Next Level Athlete. I know they're glad to have you on board and working for them, and then Texas football as well. And you know, miss you up here on this side of the Red River, but you're doing great things. So I appreciate it and happy for you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Robert. Let's do it again soon.
All right, Greg Powers from Next Level Athlete and Texas Football does a terrific job.